Okay, it's 3 minutes past 8 Eastern Standard Time by my clock. Morning or good afternoon to everybody. Um, I believe almost everybody here was invited by way of the OIX membership base, an organization that I myself was a member of. And in fact, everyone here from the OpenID Foundation, I believe, was a participant in OIX working groups. We wanted to reach out early in 2025 and give you all a view as to what's going on at the OpenID Foundation and give you some insights as to where those working groups, where our working groups and our future community groups might be an interesting place for you to collaborate with us. And so, yeah, without any further ado, I will introduce Gail. She's the executive director of the OpenID Foundation. I think probably all of you already know her, but she will give us a brief introduction to the foundation itself. And then we've also got, I believe, Mark Hain and Joseph Heenan on the line, who will then give us an overview of some of our more technical working groups. And then we will talk about the community groups that have recently formed or will be forming going forward and how you might contribute or collaborate with those. And of course, we will have time for question and answer. We'll see how we do, whether we do Q&A during or if we sort of need to get through everything. So we'll see how that goes. We'll feel our way through it. So now, truly, without any further ado, Gail, over to you.
No, thanks very much, Elizabeth. Yeah, for me, it's 4:30 in the morning, so I might not be my most sparky and lively self, but really delighted to meet many of the OIX members today. And I think we wanted to approach this as, a bit of a conversation to kind of help clarify questions you might have on the foundation, as well as to give you that overview that Elizabeth mentioned. So you get all the headlines and you can make an informed decision whether it makes sense for you to join the OpenID Foundation as a member or to join as a contributor. We're sad to see OIX, to go through the process, given its many contributions. No longer to be operating. And so we've done our best as the OpenID Foundation to create a warm embrace for those of you who are OIX former members to consider joining. And we are actively picking up some of the work that OIX was doing so that it can continue to thrive and progress. So what we'll take you through today is
recording in progress.
A bit of a welcome, share a little bit of our vision for the OpenID Foundation with all of you, kind of targeted at the OIX crowd, given many of our OIDF members will have experienced some of this content in the past. We'll work through some of the work groups, some of the community groups that are operating now. We actually just lit up another community groups last December. So there's a lot happening at the OpenID Foundation right now. We'll highlight a few of those areas: open banking and open data ecosystems, OpenID for the enterprise, verifiable credential ecosystems, global interoperability, age assurance and parental authority, death in the digital estate, and then kind of wrap up, make sure we've covered any loose ends or questions. So if you do want to take note of questions as we go through, we can take some of them. Seek to take some of them at the end, but we'll also try and have it as a two-way conversation as much as we can as we go through. Okay.
Let's make use of the raise hands function and the chat as much as possible as well as we seek to take questions throughout.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, let's jump in. Right. So our overall mission for the foundation is to lead the community in creating identity standards that are secure, interoperable, and privacy preserving. And we mean the kind of identity standards in a slightly broader brush, that it's inclusive of traditional areas like login for the enterprise or login for the consumer, which is where our origins come from, but it has a much wider kind of set of applications today, including digital identity, shared signals, open banking and open data, and people feeling empowered to go, to use the protocols and to pass data through those protocols in a way that's going to be secure and privacy preserving. And we have 4 pillars to our strategy and how we seek to deliver this. One is by developing the underlying standards, the technical standards themselves. And then the second is to lead the global community and public conversations about identity and standards. And this is where a lot of our community groups, including the newer community groups, play a key role, but also in the philosophy of the board, not to kind of limit ourselves to the technical components, but to try and offer our expertise to government officials, to peers in the community, other standards bodies, other nonprofits, and to help kind of chart a course for the evolution of infrastructure, digital identity infrastructure more broadly, and how we collectively serve the community. So that's kind of our second area, one that's emerging over the last couple of years. And then the third area is that community engagement, retention, and growth. So this would be like yourselves, right? Actively engaging with the community, reaching out to others, trying to bring people in who may not typically have been part of our community in the past. And really seeking to be a safe place for folks to get together and to progress these objectives. Fourth is to have a sustainable models to make sure that the foundation itself can continue to deliver on its mission over a longer period of time. And so that's fueled by membership as well as by certification. And I'm not sure if we'll talk about the economics much within here, but typically we have about 45% of our revenue from membership, 45% from certification, and about 10%, 15% from directed funding, where members may choose to direct funds that help the community as a whole. And directed funds can be used for a range of things. It's just a contractual model, really, which allows members, or like one member or a group of members, to fund test development or to fund interoperability events, or it can be to do security analysis on some of our protocols. There are a range of ways that we do that, but it has some brand benefits for those who contribute, and it also helps to manage the sustainability of the foundation. So this is a little different from OIX, that we have those particular channels, that we have the mechanisms of certification, and that it's such a major contributor to our operations and gives us that stability, as well as having that directed funding channel, which allows us to kind of engage with a wider sphere of people and to offset some of the direct costs that we would otherwise bear. So let's move on to the next page.
Oh, I'm trying to. I will make that happen, I promise. There we go.
Great, and I see a few more people have joined in as well, which is super. So what is the foundation? We've already mentioned the mission, our vision to help people assert their identity. We're a nonprofit identity open standards body with those other areas of community engagement that we mentioned. Our board includes a bunch of household names that you'll recognize, as well as some that you probably won't. So I'll call out a couple of those. So the second logo there is Chicago Advisors, which is basically the entity that is retained by the Central Bank of Brazil in order to enable open finance in the Brazilian market. So in this respect, Chicago Advisory Partners represents the Brazilian government on the board of the Open ID Foundation, with a mission to not only support all of the banks. There are hundreds of banks that require certification with the Open ID Foundation and relying party fintechs, but it also is a way for the government itself to kind of have a voice in what we're doing. I would say it's not kind of like a voice, it's to kind of support their needs as a local community, and to support the Latin American community, where they've been actively taking part, talking to their peers in Chile, for example, to help them up the learning curve as they enable their own open finance programs. There's a logo that is not yet on here that will be soon, which is for their peer, the Open Insurance Brazil. And Open is now a board member as of December. So we have both the open finance community represented and the open insurance community represented from Brazil on our board now. I think there was a couple of others. Connect ID, some of you might not be familiar with. They represent the Australian identity community, where they have created a private venture, mostly kind of co-owned by the banks in Australia. So great to have their representation. And we also have representation from the Australian government through a community elected role that is sitting on the board. So I think that's probably a good overview there. On the bottom right-hand side.
If I could just jump in for a second, it's probably also worth mentioning that our board consists of community representatives as well. So I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I'll jump in. So yes, we have a kind of a strategy in our process or in our constitution of how the foundation is run, that it's not just sustaining members who contribute at our highest level of $50,000, but we also have a ratio of members that are elected by their peers. So we have corporate representative roles and we have community representative roles that are elected by corporate entities and by community members respectively. And we have, I think, five positions on the board, 5 or 6 positions on the board currently that are elected by peers. And so that ensures that we have a kind of full spectrum of representation from across the OpenID Foundation membership, not just by those with the means to be sustaining members. And that's important to our philosophy as an open standards body, that we've got that wider set of voices board. But clearly the bulk of our work is conducted within the work groups and the community groups themselves.
It also reflects that our membership is made up not just of companies, but also of individual members as well, which I think is another key difference with OIX.
That's right. That's right. And we, and beyond the kind of corporate entities and the individuals, we also, are dialing up the role of governments and ecosystems more generally, as many of the key stakeholders who are starting to adopt OpenID Foundation standards as we kind of expand the set of specs and capabilities that we offer. And that's where the kind of government partners kind of come in on the lower right-hand side. I think we're definitely missing some flags now. I think we're up to about 20 different countries and ecosystems that we're supporting now, who've selected OpenID Foundation standards and are going through the life cycle of adopting and rolling them out. The top row refers to the kind of digital identity ecosystems, where we're working with the EU on the digital wallet program. They've selected the OpenID for verifiable credential family of specs. Japan has been co-funding the development of OpenID for verifiable credential specs, and also was a co-host to an event called the City Hub about a month ago. And the US government, we support in a range of ways, working closely with NIST, the Department of Homeland Security, and other departments in the work on NIST 863-4 and a range of other projects like the NIST NCCOE project. On the second row, there's many of the countries we're working directly with for open banking and open data. Probably talk about some of those programs a little bit later today, but we're working with SAMA and Saudi Arabia, with the US and Canada on their open banking regulatory kind of due process, giving them a lot of feedback and trying to support the local community there through FDX, the Australian government with the consumer data rights, the Brazilian government, as I mentioned before, which also has a seat on the board, or has chosen to take that role, and the UK through the Open Banking Implementation Authority, which is of long-standing used OpenID Foundation FAPI specs. And then the bottom row includes other markets that are kind of newer adopters. So Switzerland is one of the newest. They've just announced they're using OpenID for verifiable credentials for their digital identity platform. And Chile has announced they're using FAPI for open banking and open data. The UAE is about to launch their open banking implementation. And Mexico has asked for our support with their digital identity program as well. So a lot of a lot of governments we're working to support for a very modest organization, but we see that that's kind of part of the future. If historically we had a lot of private sector leadership in the way that we develop specs and the approach, over the last few years, we've really dialed up the relationships with governments, given their key role as an implementer themselves of our specifications, as well as of a regulator of the markets that they're overseeing. And also an amplifier, that can really accelerate the growth and the use of some of these key standards. And the top right, I guess I didn't touch on, but we do have billions of individuals using our specs across millions of applications. And there's many kind of different types of applications now. Okay, let's move on.
Now I was going to invite, I don't know if you want to
introduce. This is a prettier version. I love this.
Well, we realized that I had to add one. We just launched it, so we needed a new wedge. So
I love it. I love it. So maybe I'll do a quick kind of round here, and then I think we'll spend a bit more time on each of these. So if I start at the top of the dial, The AB Connect work group is the home of OpenID Connect, which many of you be familiar with, that is used for enterprise and individuals, primarily for login and single sign-on types of functionality. So that's part of the roots of the OpenID Foundation itself, is in OpenID Connect. And that continues to thrive and be a key capability within, the use of the internet, access to services. On the second area on the dial going to the right, going around the clock, we have FAPI. So FAPI was formerly known as the Financial Grade API, and it's now just FAPI because of the applications, not just with finance, but with health and with other verticals as well. So that high security way to exchange information across a collection of different entities in a federation. So FAPI we'll definitely dive into more later today. Shared signals, which is a combination of the protocols and the data schema to allow for the movement of risk-related signals, currently focusing on account and session-based risk signals, but there is due diligence going on to expand the schemas that could pass across the shared signals framework protocols. Very exciting, very rapid adoption, and a lot of interest in shared signals. So we definitely want to spend a bit of time on that with you today. The digital credentials protocols, another very hot area. All four of these that I've just covered are all very hot areas. So digital credentials protocols being adapted by the EU, by the US, different parts of the US community, the Australian government, Japanese government, etc. So very exciting and rapid movement on digital credentials by both private sector entities and governments. iGov is looking at government-specific profiles, starting with AB Connect, and they're considering some work to refactor that towards a FAPI-based approach. Predominantly the U.S. government with some of the co-chairs from MITRE helping to lead that work to ensure that it's fit for purpose for the U.S. government. And in some cases, other governments have been choosing to use those profiles as well. We'll dive into the EKYC and IDA working group, which Mark Hain, who's on with us today, co-chairs, and he'll dive into some of the current work that's going on there shortly. Moderna, which is kind of focused more towards the telecom network area and how to use OpenID Connect to support telecom use cases, but also that work group kind of serves as a conduit to engage with the mobile network community more broadly, and has kind of experts and representation from that sphere. The Then work group is we're going to dive into that a little bit later today, by kind of combining capabilities and building out clear specs for enterprise use cases. IPSI, which was also recently founded, both of these were kicked off, I think both of them were this year, so it's very recent. IPSI is another one gaining a lot of steam to kind of combine and layer specs together in a single standardized way. And I think that's it for the work groups, because I'm guessing you put the community groups on another page this time, Elizabeth.
I have a build on this one, but Mark, was there anything you wanted to add that you'd like to say when we do the?
Please.
No, that covers most of it. One little detail, just it was last year now, Gail. Happy New Year.
Very late last year.
So, and also just the difference between authzen and IPSI. So authzen is focusing on fine-grained authorization expression. So ways of communicating between components of the stack, specifics of authorization. And IPSI is the one that's focusing more widely on interoperability in enterprise use cases.
Go a little bit deeper into, not much deeper, but a little bit deeper into those shortly.
Yeah, perfect.
So community groups.
Excellent. All right, so the community groups in some cases run alongside a specific work group, and in some cases are slightly kind of detached because of the scope of their work. So the Shared Signals Community Group is one of the brand new ones that just kicked off in December. And they're going to be focused on how to scale and amplify the work of the Shared Signals work group, and how one crosses the chasm in adoption. There has been a great deal of enthusiasm around the interoperability events we had in London last year with the Gartner IAM event there in March, and then again with Gartner in Texas at the IAM event at the beginning of December. And we're really encouraged by the speed and the traction that shared signals, which is an area of work that's been underway for several years and is just on its way to go to final. The strength of the support from Gartner itself, seeing the potential in the future of the specifications and the family of specs, but also the wide array of other schemas and use cases that we see could ride across this, and what it could mean to have a real framework and fabric of risk signals across a wider ecosystem, or within an individual ecosystem and then across ecosystems. I understand this was an area that OIX was looking at as well historically, and that several members of the OIX community were interested in. And so I think when we talk about the shared signals community group, this is probably one of particular interest to some former OIX members. So excited to talk a little bit more about that. We have the GAIN community group, which was born a few years back, in which OIX was a co-leader in progressing that area and providing a safe space for a GAIN proof of concept. So there's GAIN itself, which was the concept of enabling interoperability across identity ecosystems, and how to achieve that with different kind of tech stacks. So what was the vision of being able to connect networks of networks that were providing digital identity services? But then within the OIDF realm, what we were focused on out of that white paper, out of that thesis, was the proof of concept to technically prove out how the interoperability could be achieved, with an initial focus more on the OpenID for identity assurance, one of the specs from the EKYC and IDA working group, or family of specs from the EKYC and IDA working group, but then also starting to extend into the digital credentials protocols specs as well to prove interoperability. And so a lot of those steps, we've already kind of gone through many milestones, and two of the co-chairs are Elizabeth and Mark, who are on the call now. So
We also have Joseph. So
and Joseph as well, right? So three of the co-chairs are on the call from that community group. So we can talk a little bit about
that's a nice example of, so like, unlike shared signals where the community group is really quite directly aligned to the technical working group, the GAIN POC actually probably had findings for EKYC and IDA, for digital credential protocols, for the FAPI working group perhaps, and AB Connect, where they're looking at the federation specification. So this community group had knock-on impacts across a lot of our other working groups, and the others are likely to do that as well, ecosystems, for example. And then the DADE community group may be an example where the community group actually turns into a working group, although I'll let you, sorry, I'm preempting you.
Yeah, no, that would be like the other way around, right?
Yeah,
So like
right.
We've often had the work groups start first, and then we've started to kind of spin off some of these community groups. But DADE is the opposite, right? So DADE in the top left-hand side, the Death in the Digital Estate community group, has been, first kind of recognizing there's a system-wide problem around how people kind of assert their identity, and how their family would manage the digital estate of someone after their passing, or after they're unable to manage their own digital estate, and how to approach that in a way that is respectful to the individual and their wishes, in a world where I think was it by 2030 or 2050, an expectation that more dead people would be on the internet than there would be people that are alive and living, which is a scary prospect, but one which is concerning, that one's digital assets, one's voice and persona and so forth could be abused by others, or it could be difficult for family to access that information. So excited to talk about that, but a work group and specs don't exist yet. We need to better understand the requirements, and the community group can help synthesize that. And ideally that will turn into work group related deliverables as well. Then the ecosystems community group, which is another brand new one that's just been kicked off. That one is looking again across specifications, starting out with more the FAPI working group, but then also into the digital credentials working group, what are the requirements of, let's say, that lead architect for an ecosystem? What does that lead architect need to know to be able to select the right specifications, to configure the right specifications, and to layer them and bundle them together in order to deliver on the intended architecture they're trying to achieve? And as we have ecosystem after ecosystem after ecosystem now, working towards 20 of them that are implementing the FAPI family of specs, the digital credential protocols families of specs as their kind of foundation blocks, and then looking to layer on shared signals or layer on eKYC and IDA identity assurance specs. What does the recipe look like? And can we offer a more clear playbook? And can those ecosystems support each other as they're going through this journey? So that community group has an ambitious intent to be able to provide more meaningful kind of day-to-day and support for those ecosystem leaders. What have I missed? Let me turn to Mark and Elizabeth and Joseph, see what I've missed on the community groups.
I would just add that the intent, I think you sort of referred to it, Gail, the intent of the community groups is to inform and maybe inspire the work of the technical working groups. There are things in the business, legal, and kind of policy domain which don't directly map to the activities of a single working group. And so having a separate group that allows for an exchange of ideas that isn't directly leading towards a single or a small number of technical specifications is something that we're overview going to be quite useful to the international community in this space.
I'll also note that I think we've just, unless I'm misremembering the time before the holiday, we have approved the Australian community group as well. That's a new community group. I didn't put it on here.
I thought one was missing.
It's an oversight. So for anybody, if there's anybody online from Australia, that may be an interesting one for you to reach out and pick up with us about.
Yeah, that's true. So one of the 3 that we just kicked off in December is the Australian community group. And this is a kind of a starting point for Australian members of the identity community who thought they might start their own nonprofit or a chapter of the OpenID Foundation, like OpenID Foundation Japan. But by starting as a community group, they had a lightweight way to kind of get spun up. And so over the course of the next 6 months to a year, they might decide to create their own nonprofit and charter their own nonprofit kind of side by side to the foundation, which we certainly encourage, and we hope to see them be successful. So we're giving them a safe space to start convening and pulling together a more detailed approach to how they'd like to structure their local operations. So exciting for Australia to have that step now.
Okay, move on.
All right, let's move on.
All right, we're going to pass this off to Joseph now, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the way that these 3 families of specifications, these 3 working groups, FAPI and the certification program around that, federation, and also to a limited degree shared signals, which we will touch on again later, how these 3 working groups and the families of specifications within them, how they support open banking and open data. So Joseph, I will move the slides along as you see fit.
Right, thanks, Elizabeth. Yep, if we could move on to the next one. So mainly going to talk about FAPI now, which is one of the standards that's been out of OIDF for 6-10 years, something like that now, and it's used a lot in the open banking ecosystems. So it's really hitting the key points you see on the screen. It's really intended for the more sensitive use cases, reduces the risk for everyone involved. It makes things more interoperable for the whole ecosystem, so it helps you scale a bit faster. And it really deals with the third-party interactions trying to access the data held by the banks or insurance companies or anything else. Next slide, please.
Sorry, what's happening?
Thanks. This is all built on top of OAuth 2. Hopefully people are familiar with that. It's the mechanism that you see happening when you try and access, say, your your Google Drive from a third-party app or something like that, you get this kind of, do you want to allow this party to access the data in your Google Drive kind of dialogues? So same kind of thing happening with open banking. Obviously, sharing your banking data is a more sensitive thing to be sharing than just your cat photos or whatever. So Happy builds on top of OAuth 2 to really provide the interoperability and the security layers that you require. Next slide, please. So FAPI really just deals with that, the connectivity and security and authorization part of the problem. So it doesn't deal with the payload side of things. People define that in that's kind of ecosystem specific. The banking system varies in each country. So as OpenID Foundation, we stick with that bit that we can focus on, which is solving that interoperability of how you actually get the ability to access that data. So it controls some of the user experience, but it doesn't dictate the full end-to-end user journey and exactly what should happen. And it comes along with a self-certification program, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, FAPI's been going a while now. It was initially created back in 2016. It was first adopted in the UK in their open banking. So it's been live there for a while now. Some of the feedback there was used. They actually adopted it before it became a final spec. So we used some of the feedback from them to improve the specification before it became final. And then we've also got a lot of learning from FAPI 1. So we've created a second version, which is just going to be going to final next month. And that's building on top of what we learned to actually really simplify the protocol while still hitting the same security aims. So next slide, please. So again, FAPI was what the first OpenID protocol, I think, to actually have a really formal security analysis. This is something that we do with all protocols now, but the researchers at the University of Stuttgart actually took the FAPI specification, turned it into a mathematical model, took the attacker model we defined for the kind of attacks we were trying to prevent with the standard, turned that into a mathematical model, mushed it all together, and eventually got out at the end a proof that, yes, the specification does actually meet the attacker model and prevent the attacks we were intending to prevent and that kind of thing. And they always find a thing or two kind of edge conditions that we hadn't quite predicted. So we try and do this before the specifications go final so that we can incorporate the outcomes of the analysis into the final versions of the specifications. Next slide, please. And we've done exactly the same with FAPI 2 as well. So that's had a security analysis. Don't think it's actually quite formally published yet, but we've had the results in the working group. We've incorporated them into the FAPI 2 standard before it moved on to final. So next slide, please.
Just to confirm there, Joseph,
yep.
FAPI 2 is in the public review period. So with a reasonable level of luck, and probably not very much luck actually needed, that will be becoming a final spec in the next month and a half or so.
Great,
So
thanks, Mark.
On the line who haven't yet you, please go ahead and have a read of that specification.
Yep, definitely. So FAPI's actually, it's achieved quite good adoption around the world. So as I mentioned, first in the UK since 2019. It was then adopted by Australia for their consumer data rights. And then since then, it's been adopted in New Zealand as well. There's a recommendation to use it in Japan. Russia are using it, although with a slightly different crypto algorithm. It's been used in Norway for a health ecosystem, been used in Germany and a few other European countries in a digital signing ecosystem. The UAE and the United Arab Emirates and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have also adopted FAPI 1 and are planning to move to FAPI 2. Brazil, both Open Finance and Open Insurance adopted FAPI, and they've been live a while now, and they're actually one of the fastest growing open banking ecosystems. They've been moving. They had a slightly late start, but they've been moving very aggressively to actually achieve much more than some of the other open banking ecosystems that have been going longer have achieved. And FDX also recommends the use of FAPI in the USA and Canada, although exactly how that pans out is subject to all sorts of interpretations around the new USA open banking rules that were published at the end of last month that didn't look quite like anyone expected. So are still
just one
still
detail
not.
I'd like to
Yeah.
share as well, Joseph, that became known to us in December, is that Helsinki in Norway is actually the biggest production implementation of FAPI2 that we know of, with over 270 organizations interacting using it in that context. And it's particularly notable because it is healthcare sector rather than financial services that have chosen to use that.
Oh, thanks, Mark. And we're also working. Sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just going to draw this back to the conversation about community groups for a moment, where we've got our ecosystems community group, which will be supporting all of these countries, and not only their implementations of FAPI, but gathering kind of insights about what countries really need from a whole suite of protocols and specifications that we can support them with. And so that's an interesting space to play. And with all of these partners and collaborating around the world, it's going to be a very interesting community group. Go ahead, Joseph.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. Unlike some of the other OpenID Foundation standards, we're also in the process of submitting FAPI one to ISO to get it published with an ISO number. That just helps some jurisdictions where having an ISO number makes a spec much easier for governments and so on to adopt and use. Next slide.
Done that last year with OpenID Connect. I don't know if I heard you say that, but OpenID.
I did not say that. No, OpenID Connect is now published as an ISO standard as well. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. So the working groups published a couple of white papers. They're just freely available on the OpenID Foundation website. We've got the formal analysis published. We're working on various further specs. We have a full certification program for FAPI1 and for FAPI2. The FAPI1 program has been thriving. I think there's been well over 1,000 certifications there. I can't actually remember the latest number. We've also had FAPI2 tests developed, and they've been adopted in Connect ID's ecosystem in Australia for sharing identity attributes. And we're expecting another. Yeah, go on, Gail.
Well, I was just going to chime in to say it's over 3,000 implementations. I think at our last report, which was 2 months back, so it's probably well over 3,000 now implementation certified. But also there's a typo in the formal analysis section. The other family, the CDR, the DCR, DC, whatever. The second bullet point is actually completed as well. So that's not a draft. It's also complete and delivered quite a long time ago. So sorry, that's an old slide.
Great, thanks, Gail. And next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit more about the certification that I mentioned. So OpenID Foundation runs certification programs for various of our standards. I'm actually the lead of the group that does all that. So we try and make sure that people actually using our standards are doing a way in that they're interoperable, they're actually implementing the security properties of the protocol correctly, and they're kind of correctly deploying the software they're actually using. So again, these certification tests are things that various regulators around the world have actually said, if you want to be part of our ecosystem, you have to pass these certification tests as one of the parts of getting onboarded, and then you have to regularly rerun them to show that you're still compliant. And so this has been really quite successful. And next slide, please. So we're going to switch to talking about federation now.
Yeah, there's just one slide on Federation, Joseph.
Yep.
It's really just to speak to, so where FAPI is there to kind of enable interoperability, I mean, Federation enables interoperability as well, but FAPI is there to secure an ecosystem to enable interoperability, the role that Federation plays on top of
Yep.
enabling.
Thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Background, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know where that echo's coming from. So yeah, so the OpenID Federation is another one of the OpenID Foundation family of specs. It's another one that's in draft. It's been used quite widely already in education systems, education networks. But we're seeing it used in some of the open banking use cases as well. People starting to think about using it in the open banking use cases as well. And what we've seen is in many of the open banking ecosystems, people are running a central directory where they have a list of all participants. But for example, what they've seen in Brazil is they have one of these directories for open banking and they have a separate directory for open insurance. And actually, they do want participants in these two ecosystems to be able to interwork with each other. So OpenID Federation bridges that gap and allows people registered in one ecosystem to show to a participant in another ecosystem that they are a formal part of that other ecosystem. And obviously, that's just a very simple case where OpenID Federation really shines is when you've got a lot of these ecosystems you want to link together, and it lets you build up a whole trust tree of all these ecosystems or multiple ecosystems. It can allow some really quite complicated cases if necessary, as well as allowing some simple cases. But it really helps with that whole trust establishment where you've got people that are part of different ecosystems wanting to talk with each other.
And this has been critical in our work on the global assured identity network proof of concept. And as we progress with City Hub, all of these efforts around global interoperability, one of the key challenges is how do you enable actors from within one trust network or trust framework to trust someone from another. And Federation has been we've learned a lot about the Federation spec and how it can do that here. And this slide that you see is from the GAIN community group. Okay, so when we're talking about open banking and open data ecosystems, we have a couple slides on shared signals, which we had shared with the Chilean government, I believe, Joseph. So I'm going to stick with you here, assuming that you were in the meeting.
Yep, thanks, Elizabeth. I can't remember if I was in that meeting or not. But yes, so Mark's going to talk a bit more about shared signals in a few minutes. But it's a framework that basically allows participants, particularly if they're using OAuth and FAPI and things like that, to communicate events between themselves. So in the normal cases, that can be simple events like people have changed their password or we've had to lock this account because it's been compromised, to allow that to be communicated out so that other participants in an ecosystem can react appropriately. But this becomes particularly of interest in open finance. So for example, in open finance Brazil, they're looking at, can they use this mechanism to inform third parties, for example, when a payment is actually completed, or when a new transaction arrives in a bank account, and that involves the need for these third parties to actually kind of poll the bank, regularly asking the bank, has this payment completed yet or not? Because those kind of polling actions have actually been causing some scalability issues for the third parties and the banks. Kind of having to build larger infrastructure than they would otherwise need to build just to allow this polling to happen. So this asynchronous delivery of events is very much of interest to them. And once they've got the framework in place, it will mean they can send all kinds of events, so they could then start sharing the fraud events as well and anything else they wanted.
This is exactly what that new community group that we formed at the end of 2024 is looking to bring to the shared signals working group. So the community group can discuss and explore these expanded use cases for shared signals and kind of the business rationale and the key questions, and then feed that into the working group who are actually working on the specifications themselves. Did any more you wanted to say on shared signals, or over to Mark for the next?
No, over to Mark. Thanks.
Okay. So Mark's going to talk to us a little bit about 3 families of specs that relate to securing the enterprise itself, and beginning with a little more of a deep dive into shared signals, which is this is kind of its bread and butter. So Mark, over to you.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, shared signals has been getting quite a lot of interest of late. Before I dive into it, I would like to share that in particular, we've been getting some very valuable support from a couple of the analysts at Gartner, who've been really, very, very helpful in helping us communicate the message out into the enterprise community that this specification is coming to a point of maturity and is ready for implementation. It really was inspired by the ideas behind zero trust as a security model, and it was born out of a couple of people in Google that was donated into the OpenID Foundation, became a working group, and has had quite a significant amount of effort, particularly from amongst the big tech crowd. But I think on the previous slide, we started to see there's actually quite a number of corporate flags stepping in behind that. Yeah,
It's taken me a longer time.
This one,
to
yes,
get
that's
there, but
awesome.
yeah, here we are.
So it's a nice set, because in my mind, what we're seeing now is it's stepping out from just the classic big techs like Google, for example. Microsoft was a very big supporter and implementer within their own walled garden, certainly. But as we can see, there's a broader range of organizations, both in terms of size and their target communities as well. So big names like IBM and Thales there, Okta from the more identity-focused side, Cisco with their very broad portfolio of solutions, but also some smaller startups bringing their agility and very, very targeted capabilities to this space. Now, the Gartner, we can go forward again, Elizabeth, thank you. The Gartner guys have actually been speaking about the use of shared signals in some of their keynote presentations on Zero Trust, and supporting the OpenID Foundation and partnering with the OpenID Foundation on how to on interoperability events that have been kind of co-located with Gartner IAM, both in London and in Dallas last year. So really, it's about standardizing and making interoperable the communication of various sorts of events. As we can see from the slide, it's based on an IETF RFC. It's by design extensible, and at the moment we have some profiles of the event types. So here we have the CAPE event types, which are about focused on the kind of security events relating to zero trust and risk. These are the 2 original profiles, with risk being more focused on the account-based security events, so things like credentials being changed or accounts being disabled. And then finally, the third one that's emerging now is one about passing information between organizations when account updates are happening. So SCIM, if you're familiar, is another protocol for communicating updates to accounts, and having the ability to use a push-based mechanism, which is one of the options under the shared signals framework, is pretty powerful there. Do I have another slide, Elizabeth?
You sure do.
Great. Yeah, so there's some key concepts here. I don't know that we particularly need to go through this in any particular detail, but there are things like the subject, what the event is about, who sent it, who received it, and then registering for a stream. So maybe the other key thing I would call out is that the receiving end of a shared signal is an organization that has explicitly requested those sorts of events to be sent to them, rather than it being any sort of broadcast mechanism. So only events that an organization wishes to see are communicated to them in that context. So yeah, we've got the asynchronous transfer mechanism across the top there that allows us to communicate specific event types. In this particular diagram, we see CAPE. So this is the zero trust type events, things like session revoked or assurance level has changed, being communicated over the top of the security event token format. And then across the bottom here is the stream control. So that's about registering for specific classes of message to be passed from the transmitter to the receiver, thus allowing the receiver to express interest and only receive events that they're interested in. So there's effectively two kind of protocol mechanisms there, one for the data transfer itself and the second one to allow registration for specific event classes. So moving on into IPSI, this is a much newer group. Sorry, did you want to add something, Elizabeth?
Just saying our newest working group.
Yes, our newest, actually, that's true. This one is coming together, focusing on interoperability across a range of the available protocols and specifications, but specifically for solving for the challenges of implementing identity and access management systems within the enterprise. I think that's all I need to say on this one, probably.
Sure. Okay, sure.
It's a really actually one thing. Just if we step back briefly to shared signals, in order to connect it back to the work that OIX has been doing. So the shared signals mechanisms that were discussed and previously written up within the OIX context were much more on the kind of risk event type of side of things. So something that I fully anticipate us learning from the handover from OIX and from the work of the Shared Signals community group is that we need to have a number of events probably collected into a new profile for Shared Signals, specifically for taking that risk information. So the events that are derived from the underlying technical signals, so that we can then communicate things, in my mind, and we need to work on this, things like risks, or sorry, fraud or specific class of risk is suspected, or fraud or maybe a account takeover has been detected. So bring it up to a fraud and risk profile level is going to be another really interesting stage, I think, on the shared signals journey. And then just moving on then into Authzen, another relatively new working group that's been going for, certainly the conversation has been going for over a year, but the working group came into being last year. This is stepping much more into the space of authorization. There's been multiple attempts over the years to come up with ways to solve for the problem of how you communicate what access should be allowed, or the fine-grained detail of who or what should have access to some resource or other. There's a few of those represented on the right-hand side. It's very distinct from the who logged in, or the identity of the person or machine involved. This is about what they're allowed to do. And there's been efforts in the past, such as Exacamal, which has seen some success, Alpha, and others. I actually found a list of over 30 on some Oasis resource a while back when I was researching this topic. but there isn't a clear standard which is widely adopted in this space, I would say. So it's another attempt at pulling together a key set of kind of active contributors in that space. In fact, the original authors of Exacaml are involved in the new working group on AuthZen as well. So it's got some excellent people working on it, and hopefully we can find the path of success this time.
And they say they want to do for authorization what OpenID Connect did for authentication.
Yeah. So yeah, what we've traditionally had, particularly with OAuth 2, which technically is an authorization protocol, is a very, very coarse level of permissions. When OAuth 2 was invented, it was really very focused on sharing information about a profile at a very coarse-grained level. So you either shared your profile information or not. And there wasn't a whole lot of thought put into the finer-grained permissions that might be needed in the more complex use cases. An example of this that has been standardized in a number of jurisdictions is the fine-grained resource permissioning around open banking, where the end user authorizes access to a specific bank account, and potentially it could be read-only access or read-write access. But at the moment, that is quite open banking specific and not the same in every open banking implementation around the world. And what that's a relatively simple case. What AuthZen is looking towards is a world where we can, in a standardized fashion, communicate very, very fine-grained access control policies. Things like you can get access to a given resource when the person is in question is scheduled to be on shift, and there's a matching change request at play. So a whole bunch of additional attributes may need to be taken into account, and how to describe that level of granular access control in a standardized fashion is the work that AuthZen's heading towards. And it needs to be fine-grained, it needs to be policy-based, and these things in a number of use cases need to be handled in a real-time fashion based on data that's available at that point in time. There's a multitude of use cases for fine-grained authorization, and to date there is not really a de facto or widely adopted standard for it. So I think that's the punchline of that one.
We're going to bring Joseph back here in a second. Joseph, I think it was the next session of these that you had a hard stop, but let me know if you have any time pressure before. I was going to pause and see if we had any Q&A on the first few. I know we've gone into some technical detail here, but wondered whether anybody had any questions or clarifications or anything at all before we move on. I want to make sure we're not losing you. Okay, please feel free to use the chat if you do have any questions. Joseph will now take you through verifiable credential ecosystems. I think after that, I'll be speaking a little bit about the City Hub efforts in interoperability, global interoperability. Okay, back to you, Joseph.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. So yeah, I'm also one of the chairs of the Digital Credentials Protocol Working Group at the OpenID Foundation, which is the one that develops the specs around verifiable credentials. So this is something that probably used to be known as decentralized identity, but I think that term's dropped out of use a little bit in favor of things like digital credentials or digital verifiable credentials, things like that. But it's generally about this whole model where there's a digital wallet essentially involved. So you have, unlike a traditional OpenID Connect model where you just have a relying party and an identity provider, you've got this three-party model where you've got somebody issuing the credential, there's a wallet that's holding it, and then a verifier that's taking on that relying party role, but is only talking to the wallet. So next slide, please. And generally, the aims of this is to give the end user more privacy, more control over their identity information, and to try and hopefully make it cheaper and faster to do some of these things. And it's just, in some ways, it's trying to mimic the way that we handle these credentials like driving licenses as passwords in the real world, where the user is holding something and can present it even in kind of offline use cases, things like that. Next slide, please. So again, the OpenID Foundation part of this is we're looking at the protocol layer, as you probably expect, and we have, sorry, and to kind of make these ecosystems really scale and all work together, the protocols that people need to use need to be consistent across the different ecosystems. So next slide, please.
Ooh.
Oh, forgot that I had an animation.
Yeah, you had builds on these, Joseph. I didn't know. Anything that these blue arrows want stir in you?
No, it's just that kind of really showing that there's going to be lots of issuers involved, lots of wallets, lots of verifiers. So it's this usual networking problem. You've got lots of parties talking to lots of other parties. So this whole kind of ecosystem of these digital credentials is still quite new. The EU's trying to roll them out to be live. I think it's the year after next, or is it next year now? I'm losing track of when they're meant to be going live with these things. And we've also seen some people in the US rolling these things out for mobile driving licenses already. But it is a fast moving space. There's a lot of protocols. So we're trying to solve some of the problems by building on top of the existing OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect protocols that are already well understood. There's a lot of discussion, fights, arguments going on over credential formats. So the OpenID protocols have been designed to be agnostic to the credential formats, so that you can at least adopt them, and then you can potentially switch credential formats or adopt multiple and keep the same underlying infrastructure. It's lots of different ways to do key management. So again, we've designed the protocols to be agnostic to that. And the protocols are also very flexible in how the trust management works. So next slide, please. So there's two main protocols that we've developed. One is dealing with how the wallet talks to the issuer and actually gets credentials. So that's called OpenID for verifiable credential issuance. And then the other one deals with how the verifier, the relying party, actually gets the credential from the wallet. So that's OpenID for verifiable presentations. So next slide, please. And this work it's already won an award at last year's European Identity and Cloud Conference. So that was very nice. Next slide, please.
Looking good, Joseph.
What was that? Sorry, Elizabeth.
Said looking good. Team.
Looking good, thank you. And we're already seeing global adoption of these standards. So they're mentioned in the European Digital Wallet Architecture Reference Framework that's been mandating the use of the OpenID for verifiable credential protocols for a while now. NIST is running a project at the moment in their Centre of Excellence that's using the OpenID for verifiable presentation specs to present MDocs. And yeah, there's an ISO spec that describes how to present MDocs using OpenID for verifiable presentations as well. The Japanese government did a project last year called the Trusted Web Project, which implemented OpenID for VC and various use cases. Next slide, please. And these protocols, as normal, we're building conformance tests as we try and do for all our protocols to ensure the same thing, that people building these things actually make them interoperable, implement the security properties and so on. So we've already got tests live for wallets for OpenID for VP. This slide is slightly out of date, unfortunately. We also have tests live for verifiers for OpenID for VP. So that's testing both sides. So testing a verifier can actually receive a credential using the protocol correctly, and testing a wallet can actually send it correctly. And those tests were actually used as part of an innovation competition that they're running in Germany as part of the development of their digital wallet. It's called their Funke competition. I'm pronouncing that German word correctly. And that they've had
yes.
I think they had 10 or 12, I can't remember the exact number of teams that were implementing wallets in various different ways. And one of their judging criteria was around security and interoperability. So they used the OpenID conformance test, especially check the wallets. And in the latest stage, the verifiers were actually implementing the interoperability protocols, parts of the protocol correctly. So that was great. And then we're also going to build out tests for issuance over the next few months. Next slide, please. So again, same as we do for most OpenID protocols, we've had a security analysis done. This was actually done as a master's thesis by Fabian. That's already published. He gave us a nice summary of the trust model and so on. And the results that came out of that analysis have already been incorporated back into the current drafts of the standards. Next slide, please. And we also have a white paper published on the OpenID Foundation website that talks about how to use these protocols. Again, it's fortunately a year and a half old now, so this is a fast-moving pace. I think we're looking to perhaps try and update that white paper over during this year to bring it up to date, but it's still a great foundation in what you need to think about. And I think that's me. Okay.
Now I'll talk a little bit about global interoperability working group in the City Hub, but first, does anyone have any questions for Joseph or Mark about any of the things we've spoken about so far? Pause. Count to 3. Oh, we have a question. I knew it would work if I paused. David, go ahead.
Joseph, very useful, thank you. And I guess it's to you and Mark. W3C and collaboration with them, as they seem to try and run a parallel path sometimes. I wonder what your thoughts might be on how we bring those things together a bit more, or is it already together?
So W3C are doing multiple things in this area. So you were probably mainly referring to their verifiable credentials working group. So they've defined their whole own set of credential formats and various other pieces. The OpenID for verifiable credential issuance and verifiable presentation specs can be used with W3C VCs. So there is some work going on there together. So yeah, we're not going to solve the credential wars, unfortunately. So the best we can do is make sure that all the credentials work and see how this actually plays out in the market. I mean,
I'll just add a thought, Joseph.
Yep.
Just to be clear, the OpenID for verifiable credential issuance and verifiable presentation protocols support the W3C verifiable credential data model and many others. So it's designed to be a protocol that's agnostic to the credential format that's transported by it.
And
Thanks, Mark.
Add that within the charter of the W3C's working group for the digital credentials, like the browser API work, there's a I can't remember the terminology they used for it, whether it was the liaison or the kind of key partner, but the OpenID Foundation is named as a key partner with whom they need to kind of, you know, be checking with, engaging with as they go through their formal processes. So that is just one of the mechanisms we're using to kind of stay closely connected, but it's largely driven by our liaison relationship and, you know, the experts who are participating in both the W3C community group and work group, as well as within our DCP work group and our other standards bodies. So it's a dance to stay jointly closely connected. And the same could be said for ISO. The ISO work with the 18013-5, 18013-7, and the same with their standards to make sure all of our collective work is lining up effectively.
Yeah, and Gail just kind of moved on to one of the other main liaisons we have with W3C, which is with what they call their digital credentials protocol. So that's a new browser API that's been defined currently for the presentation part of digital credentials. So how the verifier actually gets a credential from the wallet. So we've actually been working very closely with that working group. That they're actually mainly designing that API for the OpenID for verifiable presentations use case. So obviously it's a generic API that can be used for all use cases, but yeah, there's very much a focus on making sure that OpenID for verifiable presentation works very well with the browser API, and that they're being designed with each other in mind. And again, that will be completely credential format agnostic work, so it'll work with W3C verifiable credentials, it'll work with MDocs and MDLs from ISO, it'll work with SDJOTs, and should work with anon-creds and any other things people want to do with it. Hopefully that answered the question, David.
Yes, thank you. That's very clear.
Okay, seeing no further hands raised, I'll continue. Just a time check. I think we've got 17 minutes left on our scheduled call here now, and there are two topics that I think are probably pretty important to get to with this group. Number one being global interoperability and the work that we're doing with City Hub and how that relates in particular to trust frameworks. And second, we've got some work on delegated authority and age assurance, which Mark's going to speak to us about. And I'd like to leave some time for questions too. So I'll whip through the City Hub stuff. Just by way of an overview, because I didn't actually drop all the slides I had intended to drop into this document. City Hub is an attempt to identify what needs to be done to enable global interoperability around the world. It really was born out of a trip that Gail made to ID for Africa in the context of all the work that we here at the Foundation with OIX, with GLIFE, with the Secure Identity Alliance, the IIF, and the others who had been a part of the GAIN initiative. The insight really leaving ID for Africa is that the major movements around the world to do with global interoperability and digital identity were not really on a convergence path. And so City Hub was an attempt to bring all of those nonprofits together and more. Other standards bodies, other nonprofits in the identity space have been involved with government leaders and those who can really speak to the requirements at a government level for global interoperability. So that's what we've been pursuing. It kicked off in 2023, November in Paris. And over the course of the following year, 2024, it was really a year of global touring, global listening, where we traveled to we hosted events on 4 continents. Several of them were co-hosted by government agencies in Germany at EIC, for example, and by the Digital Agency of Japan in Tokyo. We were also hosted, we were part of ID for Africa in Cape Town last year, and we also participated at Identity Week in the US. And we've had representatives from governments around the world taking part in these efforts. We have, so that there's a lot of text on the slide. I wish I had put in some of the more high level, and I will when we distribute them. But we have these 4 work streams, and that's probably the most important thing to focus on. Use case work stream has really been focused on the champion use cases for interoperability around the world, focusing in on cases such as refugees and disasters, forms of displacement, focusing in on education credentials. How can you use your education credentials earned in one country as you go to seek employment in another? Opening bank accounts and financial services has been another. And we have found that those requirements often cross more than political borders, because many of these use cases, like opening bank accounts, proving your identity as a refugee or a displaced person, certainly, they actually require all forms of credentials. So it's not just a single credential that's relevant here. There's a lot of interoperability requirements, possibly across ecosystems, in order to serve the use case. A second work stream that we have looked at is trust frameworks, which has been led by Nick Mothershaw and the OIX. team. And what we have been doing is taking the analysis, the DNA of digital ID that OIX published last year, and building upon that. So we've added, or we are in the process of adding more country frameworks into that model so that we can analyze the differences between not just the 8 original countries, which included the US, the UK, Canada, Singapore. I'm not going to get them all off the top of my head. We looked at MOSIP, but many of you have read that report and can trust me when I say there were 8. We have added to that, or are in the process of adding, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Nigeria. And we're also looking at other non-jurisdiction-based trust frameworks, those that are more based on kind of a transnational identity ecosystem. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, they have guidelines for digital identity trust frameworks. So we're looking at how does that map onto the trust framework analysis? How does the work that the United Nations Development Program does to assess the institutional frameworks around digital identity, how does that map to trust frameworks? So that is work that is in progress. City Hub has a draft paper about how these kind of intersecting ideas of trust frameworks, both the national level trust frameworks and the transnational ecosystems, how can we make sense of all of that as we're designing governance programs. So that's a really interesting topic. The Trust Frameworks workstream meets on Thursdays, and it's probably a nice place to bring those of you who are participating in the Global Interoperability Working Group at OIX, because this has always been a collaboration between OIDF, OIX, and other nonprofits. We also have a technical work stream. This is looking at the minimum technical requirements for global interoperability. What are the must-have things that need to be defined about the architecture, the protocols, data layer, control layer, et cetera, across a global network, and what needs to be left to local jurisdictions. Mark's on the call. If you want to provide any more detail about that, Mark, you are welcome to jump in. And then we're also talking about the governance models. How do we govern all of this? So we have founding principles of City Hub is that, you know, in this world, we're unlikely to achieve a single standard, a single protocol, a single trust framework, or anything like that. So we need to have respect for national sovereignty and enable differences in those pieces to come together. So what we need in order to govern something like that is a very multi-stakeholder approach, one that looks at the rulemaking layer, the operations layer, the enforcement layer at each use case level. So we've yes, at the moment we are continuing to gather insights about all 4 of these, but what has it led to from a 2025 strategy perspective? These are the 4 key insights for what we're going to be looking at. So number 1, we believe that there are important gaps that need to be filled in order to deliver digital identity ecosystems and that operationalize the OECD guidelines. This is an exceptional piece of work that the OECD published 2023, excuse me. I'm getting confused, having just changed years. So the OECD published this set of guidelines. It includes global interoperability, but this is the insight from City Hub, is that rather than focusing exclusively on global interoperability, we need to meet countries where they are and enable them to deliver these guidelines as a whole. That includes how do we help them to achieve human-centric digital identity, an acceptable level of governance, as well as the global interoperability requirements. So we also believe that the global community benefits from multi-stakeholder convening, and the work that we've been doing to bring people together to gather requirements, to conduct research, to co-develop a shared research agenda that is led by non-commercial entities. We think there's value in that going forward. And there's value in supporting governments and nonprofits and multilaterals in operationalizing all of that. And so what we're talking about now as our strategy for this coming year comes together is, how do we move towards a digital commons for digital identity? That being a shared set of resources from which ecosystems and governments can pull things that help them with their technical specifications, things that help them design their trust frameworks, their institutional frameworks, their policies, etc. How do we build this kind of library of resources in an open, transparent way? That is what City Hub is looking towards as we move into 2025. And there will be more published on that in the coming weeks. And I would encourage those of you who are interested in the global interoperability space to engage with us in City Hub. I want to make sure we have a good amount of time for Mark to talk about age assurance because he has a lot of slides. But are there any questions? I know I raced through that and I didn't have a ton of contextual slides, which I'll put in before we distribute. Any questions about global interoperability and City Hub? I see some folks turning on their cameras. I don't know if that's an indication of question.
I think it was just me, Elizabeth.
No, it wasn't just you.
No? Oh, okay.
Don't think so.
Elizabeth, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Is City Hub purely a project within your organization, or has it become an organization in its own right?
It's not a legal entity, although we are exploring that because there are just little things that become easier when you have a legal entity. But it is a joint project between the OpenID Foundation, Secure Identity Alliance, the OIX, as was, and I think the number of nonprofits involved varies, but it's more than 10 who have been involved at one point or another.
Thank you.
OIDF, though, and Secure Identity Alliance have been doing a lot of the convening work and the organization behind it.
I'll put another couple comments in the chat for John while Mark picks up, because I think we just have, what, 5-6 minutes left.
Yes. Mark, over to you. Please let us know what is going on in age assurance and parental authority.
Yeah, sure. So let's move on to the next slide. So a few years ago, in the EKYC and IDA working group, we set ourselves the challenge to think about how we might represent the case where a person has the ability to act on behalf of a legal entity. I know that seems like a strange way to start this little part of the narrative, but that was the challenge we set ourselves. And we came up with a thing called the Authority Claims Extension, which allowed for representation that a person, because OpenID Connect is always about a person, that a person can act for a legal entity. And in the very early stages when we were thinking about this, we realized that it would be actually not very hard to extend this very draft specification of ours to allow for the case where a person was allowed to act on behalf of another person. So we've had this draft specification sitting quietly in the background for quite some time. And I am more than willing to admit that there hasn't been a huge amount of adoption of that so far, although there are a couple of organizations interested in using it for the on behalf of legal entity use case. But with all of the work that's going on around age-appropriate access on the internet and the relationship between parent and child, and maybe even the delegation of authority that a parent can give to a child to access various resources, we have been doing quite a bit more work on it in recent months. We've got a few new people in the working group, and we've been looking at building some examples of how this authority claims extension might allow us to fill in some of the blanks that exist in the technical space around when a person has authority to act for another person. So that absolutely could be when a parent has authority to act for a child. So that's the essence of it. There's a little bit of an example down the right-hand side there. We picked the Kevin McAllister use case of Home Alone fame as one of the most famous fictional families in history, I think, probably. And some of the challenges in that movie may actually be helped by having a way of digitally representing that relationship in the future. So
Should
yeah,
have made it
that's
born in the 80s.
sorry.
Their birthdays are should have
Yeah.
updated the birthdays. Next
Um,
time.
Yeah, and Martin, yes, I see your comment. We absolutely think that is the case too. So with people with diminished capabilities, the elderly in particular, so we already have some examples under development in the spec around power of attorney as well. There's also some people we've been talking to about how to reuse this capability in a number of indigenous tribal communities as well, where there are cases where there's a single person with access to digital resources for the community, and being able to represent that somebody is acting for somebody else is actually quite an important thing in that context as well. So there's quite a broad range of use cases. So yeah. One of the people that's contributing here is a long-term age assurance and child protection technologist and entrepreneur. We are collaborating both in the OpenID Foundation working group, EKYC and IDA, but also through some of the ISO community or working groups as well. So specifically around ISO 27556, which is about age assurance as well. So there's likely to be more cross-pollination going on there between the OpenID Foundation and ISO there. So given the time, I think I'd probably better stop there unless there's anything else you think I should cover, Elizabeth.
No, I mean it was a good set of slides that you had, and they'll be in the distribution.
Yeah.
Why don't we just do just a minute for questions? So I'll stop sharing the screen. Any questions on delegation or age authority, or anything at all about the foundation? Or any one of us?
Maybe the only other thing I would add on the delegated authority spec is that it's still relatively young in its life cycle, so it's very open to change. If people wish to come and participate in the process, that would be awesome. Our next step there will be to publish it as a implementer's draft at some point in the next few months.
Okay. We do have a question. John, go ahead.
Elizabeth, hello. Can I pose a question to OIDF that I've posed frequently in the past and never really got a good answer to? Not to OIDF, but in other forum. There's been a complete silence about the business model for all matters digital identity and attribute exchange. Is it the belief in OIDF that there is no business model and that it will be done effectively care of government with no integration with payment systems and the like, or do you have an alternative view, or do you simply not know? Because I don't know.
I'll first of all, I'll jump in here. I will admit to having been involved in this conversation
Sorry, Mark.
previously in the commercial side of things in OIX. OIDF is a bit of a different beast. We're not really covering the business and legal side of things here, although clearly we do need to take them into account from time to time. We're much more on the technology and protocols side of things. I would say that the way the technical specifications, particularly around verifiable credentials and wallet-based architectures, is flexible in that regard, but we're not trying to solve that problem.
I understand. Okay.
Certainly within the DCP working group.
DCP being delegated?
Digital credential protocols.
Sorry, okay.
Which is where we're doing most of our work around the wallet-based architecture.
Like, as you say, we have talked about this before, and that's pretty much the answer I expected. Thank you.
I would just add into that. Mark's quite right in terms of like where the certainly the historical focus of the foundation is and what our current outlook is for 2025. However, we have heard the conversations around business models often comes up. We do know OIX used to handle that. There may be some effort to address that through local UK-based entities and so forth, but in the context of like global, business models or appetite, there's not a completely closed door to the OpenID Foundation addressing it, but there would need to be members with substantive interests and a charter created, and then a discussion to review it and make sure it's aligned with the mission and the vision and things like that. So it's not a closed door. It's a question of whether there is that substantive appetite to engage in those questions.
I can just about see a set of scenarios or set of contexts in which such an appetite might emerge, but we're not there yet, as you said.
Maybe a little premature. I mean, we talked a lot about cross-border interoperability, and clearly a commercial model that's super viable would help with cross-border interoperability.
Yes.
But generally speaking, what we see is a tremendous focus on domestic markets, whether they're government-led or private sector-led, and both of them are thriving, right? Depending, and in some cases, both of them at the same time in a jurisdiction. So there's just, the concentration of focus, that 90% plus of focus is definitely on the domestic markets, and that cross-border set of requirements and demand is just not 100% there yet. And that's one of our key learnings from City Hub that Elizabeth mentioned, is we need to meet people where they are right now, which is predominantly focused on domestic.
Okay. And also my apologies, I turned up late because of my mistake. Did I hear that the slides are going to be circulated?
We'll share the slides. Yeah, we normally post all the slides of our events like this on our website, and so we'll get an email around to everyone who registered just to point to where they are, and we can also share the recording.
Thank you.
Very open here at the OpenID Foundation.
Yes.
Any other questions? We still have people on the line, so we're here to answer any questions if you're here harboring any.
And maybe
I could do with going to my next meeting actually, so if you'll excuse me.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye, Mark.
Please do feel free to drop as well. I've got okay, no questions for now. Thank you.
I think the one main thing would be to kind of just hit the timeline for the OIX members that wanted to join as members or whatever. Like there's a specific period of time they need to reply, I think by the end of this month, if they wanted to kind of take up on the offer of being a member and continuing their OIX period of time. So I think when we circulate the deck and the materials, we should also circulate the information on the offer, the OIX member offer.
Yeah, sounds good. Do we have that information here?
Unless Paul wants to chime in, he might remember the terms.
I can send it to you. If we can reply back to everyone, then I'll make sure that you've got it, Elizabeth. So
great, we'll do that then.
I've spoken to quite a few people actually on this call, so I know Paul Smith is definitely now in, so which is good. Welcome, Paul.
You're welcome, Paul.
Thanks very much, Paul.
I can't remember if I CC'd everybody, OIDF everybody with the list of who'd registered. So and there was a couple of very last minute ones just before the call started today. So I'll update that and get that out to everybody.
Thanks.
So we can make sure everyone else has the information that they need with regards to joining OIDF.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you all so much for making the time to come and speak to us this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is. It's been great to meet you, and hope 2025 treats you more than kindly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.
Bye.